All right. Hey, welcome back to the Go for CEO channel, where we bring you CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs around the world. We've been touching Australia and Ireland, and so many other countries based on some of the relationships we've been able to build over the last year or so on this little app called Clubhouse. But, we bring it stateside a lot too. And this gentleman has been someone that I've been impressed with, someone that really does something in the similar venue of what I do in the business capital space. And, he was honored me to be able to be on the show. He shuffled some things around. I shuffled some things around. Hey, that's just entrepreneurial life, right? So excited to have Mr. Ron Martinez from Gray Scale Capital. Thank you so much, Ron, for coming on to the Go for CEO channel.
Thank you, John, for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully we can have a good conversation today.
No, exactly. And, I think people are really going to learn. I've heard you on stage plenty of times sharing kind of your wisdom, everything that you do. And obviously, getting a chance to learn and understand where you come from and how you do things and how you process those things to be able to help other businesses as well. So, Ron, a lot of times our interviewees start with, what did they think of? How did they start to put that idea together? How did Grayscale Capital even come to fruition? So if you don't mind kind of giving us a little bit of that journey, that background, a little bit about yourself as well, and then we'll dive into the deeper stuff of business and day to day. So take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, John, again for having me. I guess my journey started when I was living in Seattle. I had just left the military back in 2016. And, I was working as a salesperson. That's kind of, I guess a lot of people's stories kind of starts that way as a salesperson. That's kind of how I started, commission, being on the field, got into the merchant services business, merchant processing, built a small book of business and ended up selling that small book of business to a bigger competitor, right? I was looking around on LinkedIn because I said, hey, I want to do something a little bit different. I don't know what I wanted to do. Came across a gentleman who is now part of our advisory board and a mentor of mine. And, he started talking to me. I connected with him. He had talked about, hey, I just finished up doing this. I think it was a $33 million deal, financing deal. And I said, wow, that sounds like something that, out of my range, right? I decided to connect with him, and we had one conversation that night. He actually called me. We had a conversation for like 4 hours, just talking about, what he does and how he wants to, have other people doing the same thing that he does. And I said, wow, that sounds like something that I want to get involved in. Always wanted to have a career where I had an impact on a lot of people. And so, when he told me, hey, look, I have a firm here in New Jersey, we do financing, we do mergers and acquisitions, all that stuff, I'd love for you to, to learn and kind of, work with me. I jumped on it immediately. And the way that I started even looking for someone like that is because a lady came to me and said, messaged me on LinkedIn and said, hey, we're looking for equity partners for a venture that we have going on. We have a couple of banks involved. We want to know if you know anybody. That's kind of how I started looking for people that, I could probably just refer to her. And that's kind of how I got into the business. Before I moved from Seattle to New Jersey, which is where I'm from, I started doing a bunch of research. I took courses on corporate finance, on modeling, financial models, building all that stuff. I wanted to be good before I got there, and I showed up at this guy's door. As soon as I got there, I started working for him for free, just for straight commission. I was in his office, working probably up until like 7 or 8 at night from 9 a.m. So I put in a lot of hours. I followed him everywhere. And, he told me, hey, eventually at some point, I'm going to push you out and you're going to be doing your own thing. And I said, okay, I'm game. Took me around like 3 months to finance my first transaction. But I got it done. From there on, it became a little bit easier to do origination, to do valuations, all that stuff that we'll probably get into in a little bit. But long story short, after a year, I told him, I think I'm ready. And so I started, my LLC, Grayscale Capital LLC. And, he gave me some tools, gave me some mentorship, and said, okay, you're ready to go. Started covering clients. I started bringing people onto the team. And that's kind of how I got my start. I've depended a lot on my mentor to the point where I actually put him on my advisory board now. And even to this day, we do deals together. So when I have, deals that are, outside of the resources that I have, this guy has probably 10 businesses under management right now, doing almost 100 million in revenue. So, he's a pretty cool guy to have around. So that's kind of how I got my start in entrepreneurship. Always had that bug, never really knew how to do it. But I was glad I was able to find someone that actually took the time to mentor me, to teach me, and to let me into their world. And that's kind of how I got started in finance.
I love it. I love it. And what a cool story, right? First of all, it took a decision for you to leave Seattle and maybe some comforts there and fly across the country. And, but you were also proactive on LinkedIn and you found someone that kind of hit your fancy. And look, Go for CEO community, that's called decision making, right? Ron took a decision, he acted on it, and then he didn't stop until he made it successful. So really, really cool beginning. So help us understand. I mean, obviously, entrepreneurs, they kind of things, they start things and then sometimes they're like, well, where's that money going to come from? What is it going to do? You mentioned that first deal. What was the structure of it? You were working, long hours, really with no hourly pay, right? So you were outside of that employee mentality. You're that self-contracted entrepreneur. What did that first deal look like and how did you structure it to be able to make money?
Well, it's funny because I've always been active on LinkedIn, and it's something that I try my best to be consistent with. But this guy from Canada, he's a video game developer, came to me and said, "Hey, I see that you're in finance. We're looking for money," and that's kind of how I got my first deal. Not to mention the fact that I was making phone calls, sending emails, trying to connect with so many people. But I always say that when you put in the work, it'll pay off eventually, right? If you put yourself out there, someone will see you, right? So I don't really consider it luck. I consider, hey, I put myself in a position where I could be found, and people can seek me out. And so this gentleman, came to me and said, hey, I'm looking for money. He wanted $8 million in growth capital for his video game development company. We started off with 300,000. That was the first deal that I ever did. It was a cash flow loan that he got, and I was set to make a certain percentage. And then that was, even though that was my first deal, it was a pretty big deal, right, for me. I had never done a $300,000 deal before. I'd never done a $20,000 deal before. So to me, it was a huge deal. And, I was able to then, have some money for me to eat, right? But also save some money for me to eventually start, and capitalize, what would eventually become, Grayscale Capital. But as far as how the deal was structured, it was a very simple loan. It was just a cash flow loan based on the cash flow of the business. We ended up afterward, I think a year later, or 6 months later, we ended up giving him a little bit more tranches. So he ended up getting his 8 million eventually. But that first transaction that I ever did was that $300,000 transaction. That was when I was still under Greenpoint Capital Partners, which is one of the firms that sponsors us, where my mentor is a principal.
And was that set up through where you said Greenpoint? Did they have their own capital that they were deploying, or they had access to other capital out there in the marketplace?
They had access to other capital out there in the marketplace. Now they're in a position where they do have their own capital, but 3 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? And so they were doing just a lot of just intermediary work, right? Similar to what you and I do. They just had so many connections, though. They had so many investors. you know, they had been doing this for so long already. My mentor had. And so, you know, to him, okay, I know exactly where to go to get this deal done. I know who to call, you know, the cases. And the fact that, you know, he had that experience and that track record, if I would have done that deal by myself, I probably wouldn't have gotten the money for him, because I just didn't have those relationships yet. And that's really where in our business, you know, we make our monies in being able to build good relationships. And so they were able to find the credit investor to supply the loan, and, you know, away we went.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you're off and running, you're on that flight, and you know, you get that first deal under the table. So, or, you know, what are some things that you're thinking of right now? So, you know, walk us through kind of that journey of that first year, because I know that you got to a point where you were kind of let out of the nest as a little eagle, right, to fly on your own. But what are some other steps that you're doing? What are you thinking about marketing? You know, how are you start to brand yourself within the company of Greenpoint, but still stand on your own to eventually go by yourself?
So I've been very fortunate and very blessed, I would say, because, you know, my mentor, and I speak about him a lot because he's given so much to me without really expecting much in return, right? You know, he's one of those people that said, hey, look, you're going to be working within our firm, but I want you to start your own LLC, you start marketing yourself in that way, right? So I was kind of like incubated, you know, for the last 6 months of being there, where I was able to market myself as Grayscale, but I had the support of, you know, Greenpoint to back me up and get deals actually done, right, and start building those relationships. And so, you know, I got my LLC. I have a website. Did my logo. As far as marketing goes, you know, I started, you know, posting, branding myself as, you know, Grayscale, right? Both on LinkedIn, on all my social medias. And, you know, I would just connect with a lot of people, and that's the name that I would use. Obviously, you know, when you're incubated by another company, similar to like, you know, hedge funds that are incubated by, you know, these big banks, right? They have their own brand, but they're backed by, you know, whatever bank that they belong to. That's kind of the relationship that I had, and that's kind of how I marketed myself as well, right? So, hey, you know, we're Grayscale, but we have a backer that's helping us out on deals as well, and helping us build relationships at the same time. But as far as marketing, to be honest with you, a lot of, you know, in our business in finance, it's a little bit different, right? Because we're targeting mostly businesses, not necessarily consumers. So the marketing is a little bit different. For me, the way I marketed myself was through events, through referrals, right? So I get really involved in my city, in my county. Everybody knows me in my county. You know, I make sure that I'm tapping into the chambers of commerce. Very, very important, right? And then I'm doing things where I'm giving back without expecting anything in return, right? So when someone says, "Hey, Ron, can you you know, go talk to, I don't know, my ninth graders," right? My dad's a high school teacher, and can you talk to them about you know, finance, and talk to them about, you know, financing and business buying and all that stuff? That's kind of what we're into now. You know, I do it, right? Any opportunity that I get to get in front of people, I try my best to do it, and that gives you exposure, right? And that's kind of what I've been doing as far as like marketing goes. And I think it's been pretty effective so far.
Really awesome. Really awesome. So, you know, a lot of it that you just described is, you know, investing in the time, right? You said, first of all, when you went to this company, you know, it was basically commission, right? No hourly pay. But you knew that if you invested with a guy like that had so many connections, it would be an incredible payoff. Now you're talking about, you know, the last few minutes there, getting into the community, volunteering, you know, being able to be present for other people to show them that you care first about what's going on. And then obviously they're pretty interested in saying like, hey, well, Ron, what is it that you do, right? How can you help me? Well, who can I refer you to, man? This is so cool what you're doing to help others. So it's sometimes it's a long track, right? And when you need to make a paycheck or pay your bills. Sometimes it could be a little bit crazy in that sense, not to be too hungry in that sense of capturing that next one, but building it out. So I love that you said that. So take us through now. You start building a little bit of momentum. You get that first deal under your belt, like you said. You start knowing the lay of the land, how to structure things. What are some things that you did to learn quickly? Because I think a lot of people, either in this business or any business, take too much time sometimes to learn, but not enough time to be proficient per se. So walk us through that journey for yourself.
So proficiency is only developed through practice, right? You can have knowledge, but you're not really gonna know the nuances of how things actually work until you actually get out there, right? So for me, I feel like I did a good job, just throwing myself in there. I've never been the type of person to be scared of anything. I mean, I left school to join the military, right? And although I did finish, I actually ended up changing my major. I didn't mind throwing myself into something that I thought was interesting, right? And coming out of the military and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, like anybody would have been like, okay, well, let me just go get a job and in the field that I was doing in the military, because I was a paralegal in the military. And that'll be the end of it. I actually had offers from attorneys' offices, very famous attorneys, because I used to work on a lot of national deals or national trials and stuff like that. They said, hey, look, whenever you get out of the military, you have an $80,000 a year job waiting for you in Texas or in New York or wherever. I decided to bet on myself, and I made the decision. I wanted to throw myself in there, and luckily for me, my mentor allowed me to be in the room when these things were going on, and not just learn about it from a book, but actually experience it. Right? I was on the calls. I was on the the calls with investors, with lenders, with clients. I was learning how to cover clients. How do you originate, and how do you underwrite, all that stuff. So I was, at the same time that I was learning, I was also putting it into practice right away. And that allowed me to kind of retain everything that I was learning.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, look, I mean, part of the learning journey is like you said, being involved, getting into the minutia of it, and then understanding that you're going to mess up. I'm sure there was times that you weren't totally sure, and you owned up to what happened, and you move forward. So neat stuff. So, you get to a point where you start to learn the business and you get a little bit of credibility, and then all of a sudden, whack, you get thrown out of the nest, right? So you got to be the little eagle of growing up, right? So it's interesting that it took only about a year. Tell us a little bit about kind of that grayscale moment, knowing that now you had the fortitude to go on your own and start to build up that momentum now as well.
Yeah. So look, you're totally right about the mistakes. I made so many mistakes, even though I knew a lot of stuff that I was doing. Managing a business is a little bit different than just covering clients, right? Mm-hmm. Managing cash flow is different, right? So when you're, pricing things and all that stuff, you have to take all these things into account, right? The fact that you have to pay certain people. And that's something a responsibility that I didn't have before. So I did make a lot of mistakes. I got into transactions that I wasn't sure that I could do. And that I wasn't sure if I would be able to deliver. There was just a lot of things that I didn't do right early on. That being said, having someone to mentor you is super important. I didn't really believe this back then, about the whole mentor thing. But looking back and even thinking about it right now, like a lot of the things that I've corrected have been corrected through conversation with someone like my mentor. And so, he was able to help me navigate through certain things. Our first deal that we did by ourselves was actually a $6 million acquisition financing deal. We raised $4 million. So it was a group. It was a private equity group, fundless sponsor, or independent sponsor is what we call them now. They wanted to buy a landscaping company. $6 million deal. They were going to put in $2 million, but they needed a loan for $4 million. And that was the first deal that I got after I left the firm on my own. I actually got it through Facebook, believe it or not, which is another thing as well. And we were able to find the right SBA lender for them. We underwrit the transaction, and that's one of the things that we tend to do a lot of. Right, we do a lot of upfront work, so that when we do present deals to capital partners, they know, okay, these are deals that have already been vetted, and even though they always do their own due diligence, it feels good to know that, okay, someone actually went through this stuff, scrubbed it, underwritten, did the underwriting for it, and is presenting it to us, in a nice way, right? As opposed to just sending a bunch of, packets out there. And so we did that. The deal took, I believe it was like a month and a half to fund. So, the guys, they were ready, they were prepared, they had, they were capitalized and all that stuff. So that was the first deal that I did. Obviously, I had, my mentor involved in Greenpoint Capital Partners as well, involved in the deal. But that was the first deal where I could say, okay, I did this on my own. I originated it. And, I found, the capital partner, and I put the deal together. We did the analysis for it. And it was a really good feeling once we, aside from the money, once we actually did the deal, that was very satisfying for me, knowing that, okay, like I can actually do this, you know what I mean? And that kind of built momentum from there. We ended up doing another acquisition deal for 4.1 million, I believe. And, so on and so forth. We've gotten more opportunities. One of the things that I have learned, though, is how to say no. And, I like to say yes to everything, right? Because as you know, like when someone comes to you with an opportunity, oh, I have this, opportunity, you see the dollar signs and it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. But those are that's one of the things that I learned, is how to analyze things before I say yes to it. Because as, I mentioned previously, that's one of the mistakes that I kept making, is I just kept saying yes to everything. And, knowing that or maybe not even knowing that I didn't have the capacity to execute on it.
It's so true, especially in this field, right? So Go for CEO community, if you get into the finance funding side, it is good to say no, because a lot of deals can waste your time. And all of a sudden you spent 30, 60, 90, 120 days, and it's like, poof, you made no money. And you're just spinning your wheels. So really cool thing. So, I guess one of the things that we could transition in that part of the conversation is, how did you start to learn then what your partners with the capital side wanted to fund? Was it that, you networked with them? Or did they give you kind of written out models of, hey, here's the types of businesses that we're willing to fund? What were some ideas that you started to garner from those relationships?
Yeah. So the first thing was, just having conversations with them, right? They'll tell you what it is that they like, even though a lot of them, they'll tell you that, they're agnostic, but there are typically industries that they like, deal size, just certain criteria that they have in general that would make the deal a home run. And so, what I started doing was, I started putting together like an Excel sheet of the lender or the investor, whatever it is, whatever capital provider it is, what their requirements are and what their criteria is, what industries they like, and all that stuff. And that way, whenever I did get an opportunity, I said I was able to compare it to what I had. And if it didn't match what I had, I had to say no, right? And if it did, then yeah, of course. But mostly networking. Most capital providers will have, some sort of executive summary that you can take a look at, and it'll tell you, hey, we're looking for this, X, Y, Z. But yeah, so I would ask them for that, and then I would just continuously, continue to network with whoever my point of contact was, to see what kind of changes there were. Sometimes they have different things that they implement, or maybe there's another division that opens up, right? Which was the case with one of my providers. Hey, look, we have, a division now that's opening up, specifically for government contracting. So now I know, okay, well, these guys don't just do this now. They also, work with, companies that do government contracting. And so, just having those constant conversations, following up with them, and maintaining those relationships, I think is the best way for you to know what it is that they're actually looking for. The more you talk to them and the more you allow them to talk, the more they'll tell you.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah. I mean, look, they're ultimately the ones that are allowing you to kind of broker the deal, right, per se, and put your middle hand in there, support the client that you have, and get them to the lending institution that you know can fulfill the deal. So interesting stuff. So how long has Grayscale been around now?
Since 2018.
18. Okay. So almost 4 years, coming up on 4 years, probably anniversary date. So as you've built out more and more deals, what are some of the things that you've done to kind of maybe head towards, if it is a goal, of funding your own deals? Could you give us a little perspective on that? And then also I want to talk about scaling, because I'm assuming you're not wearing all the hats, even though at the beginning you were wearing the marketing hat and the networking hat and the pay yourself hat, all those types of things, type of entrepreneurial hats. But so both areas of how you look at scaling, and then do you have a perspective on maybe funding a deal in the future, or if you've already done it yourself?
Well, funding a deal. So there are different, types of funds that I can put together. So for example, when I go to a lender, if they're not a bank, right? If they're a non-bank bank, it's typically a credit fund, right? It's a fund, a pool of capital that they have, limited partners that, put money into it, and then they'll lend it out at, whatever criteria they set, right? For me, I haven't really been interested in starting a credit fund. I am, however, starting a private equity fund, and that's a little bit different. That's more on the equity side of the capital stack. So if we're going to go out and buy a business, or invest in a business, we typically do it with within the equity part of the capital stack, which is typically right at the bottom, right? So for example, if let's say there's a business that needs an injection of cash, but they don't necessarily want to take out debt, we would be the kind of partner to come together with, so that we can actually give them, so that we can actually give them, the capital that they need in the form of equity, not necessarily credit. We're kind of pivoting a little bit as we speak. Although we do client work, we want to put our focus into private equity. We want to start, taking capital from, limited partners and investors, so that we can go ahead and deploy that capital in the form of equity, to make control acquisitions. And what that basically means is buying the controlling interests of a company. But as far as a credit fund, maybe that's something that we would want to do, in the future. But it's never been something that I've, actually been that interested in. But who knows,
No, hey, I love it. I mean, you're sharing kind of the areas that you really want to concentrate on, and that means you're focused, right? You know what you want. You're delivering on those type of opportunities, and you're making those things happen. So, how about scale within Grayscale? Obviously, you start with a company of one. Not sure if you have how many employees and stuff like that, but tell us a little bit about kind of how you've been able to set up the infrastructure so that you're not tearing your hair apart every day. So
that's a battle even that I have even today. We have, let me see, I think it's like 5 or 6 members right now of the firm. We're still working on bringing in, well, I'm still working on bringing in, people that are going to be, I guess, I want to be able to fire myself from certain, jobs. Mm-hmm. And so, we're now starting to bring in, people to be able to get that job done. I'll be honest with you, I still wear a lot of hats, right? We're still considered, not necessarily a startup, but we are, we're only 3.5 years young. You know what I mean? It's we're not a 10-year-old or 20-year-old company yet. But, we've done enough transactions to where, okay, and we have a big enough pipeline where, okay, now we actually need help, right? There are transactions that I have to turn down because I just don't have, the scale, right? Kind of like how you say. And so it's very important to be able to set up an operation and put in processes and systems that are repeatable. And then that's kind of what allows you to scale. So what we're working on right now is implementing those processes and systems so that then we can bring in people and just plug them in. That's one of the mistakes. Another one of the mistakes that I've made in the past is bringing on people without having anything for them to do, really, without having any process or any system for them to manage or to plug into. And so what we did recently after the pandemic is kind of downscaled or downsized a little bit so that we can get the process and the system part right. And then we can, plug people into the process and system and not necessarily plugged into me. Because if they're plugged into me, then I'm still doing everything, right? It's just everybody's coming to me. And so I want them to be able to plug into a system that we've created so that way I can then, take a step back and manage the business, not necessarily the internal operations of the business, if that makes any sense.
No, 100%. I mean, Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Poor Dad fame, talked about that cash flow quadrant, right? Employee, hours for dollars, solopreneur, right? Sole proprietor. And now you've started to really kind of scale out over the last 3.5 years a business so that, like you said, you can almost fire yourself from certain duties. So awesome stuff. So, hey, look, as we kind of end up the interview here, we typically go through what's called CEO, right? So client experience, employee, or really engagement. We're talking it now. Why do people engage with Ron Martinez and Grayscale? And then operational excellence. So why don't we start maybe 30, 60 seconds on what your value proposition is for the client experience?
Absolutely. So for us, our value proposition is that, we're able to take a transaction, package it correctly, and send it to the right capital source for a speedy, transaction. Now, what we like to do and what we've been doing recently is helping small business owners scale, right? And have access to large business resources down in the lower middle market. So these are companies that are doing between 500,000 and 50 million, what we call small businesses here in America. But our mission is to help small business owners, small and lower middle market businesses grow through acquisition and through strategic capital. That's what we do. And so that means that, we have the ability in a 12 to 18 month period to help grow a business strategically 100 to 200%. And that's kind of what our value proposition is. We do this through strategic alternatives like acquisitions or joint ventures, partnerships, and stuff like that. And so we advise clients on what to do in that aspect in order to reach, those growth goals.
I love it. I love it. So, it's interesting because at that point, you really start to become a total, 360 consultant for them, right? Especially in that small to medium-sized business. A lot of times you get stuck at $500,000, $1 million. I know the business I had in 2009, it was kind of it was like I didn't want to be, stuck in a certain situation. So I asked my partner to buy me out, right? We probably could have gone to 20 million, but we got stuck at around 3.5. And it was an interesting time. So interesting stuff. So how about engagement? Ron, on Clubhouse, you're very engaging. You've got this great personality. Obviously you show well on video. Like you talked about networking. You talked about being in the community. You talked about really putting in the time with people. You talked about reaching out to a guy randomly on LinkedIn and building something so that he gave you an opportunity and became a mentor. So why do people engage with Ron Martinez?
Wow, that's a really good question. On a professional level, I think people engage with me because of what I tend to give, right? I similar to my mentor, something I learned from him is, I'm an open book. I don't have to hide trade secrets from you. It really doesn't matter to me. the more, me giving of myself to you is not going to take away from me. Mm-hmm. And so the reason why I think people like to engage with me is because I just give, right? And I like to give. And if I receive something in return, that's great. But I think that for me, like my legacy is very important to me. And I want that to be my legacy is that of being able to give, right? Not necessarily taking from people, you know what I mean? And so that's why people like to engage with me. I try my best to be as honest and as integral as I can. And, I've learned over the years, how to be very, very upfront with people and tell them, hey, look, I wish I could help you, but I can't help you. Mm-hmm. And if I can't help them, then just point them in the right direction, right? And so with me, when people engage with me, they know they're going to get something out of it, even if it's through me directly or someone that I know. I'm all about connecting with people, and that's something that I learned from my mentor. It's something that I wish and I hope that the people that come after me or that work with me also learn from me.
Fantastic stuff. So I love what you said right there. Sometimes maybe you can't help them, but you actually guide them still. I had a quick story. Gentleman called me. He kept on emailing me, and he didn't realize that I wasn't a good contact for him. I called him back after he left a message, and I was like, hey, I'm not a good contact for you. Like, what is it that you're actually trying to do? And he told me he was just a business development guy, and sounded like a young guy. I pointed him in a direction of someone, and then 2 days later, he sends me a gift card, an e-gift card of a Starbucks, and he said, hey, thank you so much. Because it hit him in a way that it wasn't just someone blowing him off or being rude to him. It was someone genuinely caring, like, hey, I'm a business development guy every day of my life. So I always like when someone at least guides me in the right direction if they can't help me, right? So what a great story and a reason why people engage with you. So last one is operational excellence. Maybe 60 seconds on, what it is that you've learned and how you start to manage, because you got 4, 5, 6, 7 deals in the pipeline. It's no easy task sometimes, knowing what level it's at. Is it almost at clear to close? Do you send out a term sheet? Do you have a commitment letter yet? Like, where's it at? Those types of things. So what's part of the secret of the operational excellence that you've done with Grayscale?
Okay, so 2 things. The first one is knowing what are the critical roles within your organization, and then bringing in the right people to fill those roles. That's probably the biggest thing that I've learned, is being able to find the right people and then knowing exactly where to place them, right? Sometimes you may have very talented people in your organization, but they're in the wrong position, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're not as effective as they could be. And if you don't know what those critical roles are, right, to get you, in my case, to get a deal from point A to point Z, then it'll bottleneck at some point and it'll never go, come out the other side. And so for me, what's been very important for me and what I've had, at the top of my mind recently is like, what are the critical roles that I need to fill, and who are the people that I feel best fit personality-wise, culture-wise, skill-wise, that, they can plug in here and they would do a great job immediately without me having to, overmanage or helicopter over them or anything like that. So operationally, that's what I would say. What are the critical roles within your organization? Kind of like the skeleton of your organization, and then finding the right people to actually place in those roles. That's been very, very critical for me.
Fantastic stuff. Well, Ron, man, thanks so much for, stopping by the Go for CEO community. We'd love to have you on every 6 to 12 months, learn the voyage, right, from a young 3 to 5 year business to over the next 10, 20, 30 years that hopefully that you kill it and just are this huge impact that you make in the funding community. So any last words or ways that people can connect with you, either on social or directly, email, all that type of stuff?
Yeah. So, my email is ron@onegrayscale.com, spelled out ONEGRAYSCALE.com. On Instagram, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, at Ron_Martinez_. I guess someone took Ron Martinez, but so I had to do it like that. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, Ron Martinez, and on Facebook as well as Ron Martinez. So I generally like to connect with people. on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. But recently, as you know, I've also been on Clubhouse. So I'm also on Clubhouse as Ron Martinez as well. So you can connect with me, send me a message. I'll get it, and I'll do my best to respond, right away.
Awesome, my man. Well, hey, super excited to have met you. I know that we talked offline at one point a while back. Finally getting a chance to circle back and reconnect and have you on the Go for CEO channel. So ladies and gentlemen, check out Ron Martinez at onegrayscale.com. Go ahead and leave a message. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You know what? Ron Martinez is one of those guys that we have on here. One of the many people that are small to medium-sized businesses that are making impacts in the United States and around the world. We've had people from Ireland and Australia and, New York and Seattle and whatever. And it's interesting to see the stories and how they combine their old, understanding of knowledge to growing new knowledge to impacting businesses. So excited to have you on. Thanks so much, Ron. And we look forward to having you in about 6 to 12 months.
John, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.